Thank you very much for the introduction, Mark. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon in North America. So this is part of the North American knowledge teaching. And I want to thank everyone for attending today. We have a unique situation here in Canada. The temperature has gone up to about 18 degrees Celsius, and it's still April. And so we're grateful for that. And I know many are you wanting to get out and do your gardening or not, but we appreciate you being here because we believe this is important, because this is where all the souls meet. And the souls meet because this is where the science meets the soul of man for the purpose of peace. And as you can see by all these medallions here, our family is growing, and our family is transcending the geographical limitations and the physical limitations. So we're talking not only about this earth, but we're talking about the universal community as well. And this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science. This is the intermediate level of the Insight series. Today's subject is harvest. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is April the 24th, 2022. And this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So we've tried to organize these particular classes, into an organization where we have two coordinates, and one has to do with the coordination of the basic, intermediate, and advanced classes. And the other is the coordination of a progress of classes going from intermediate teaching, intermediate understanding, intermediate knowing. And today is the last class of the Intermediate Insight series. So whether you're a new knowledge seeker or a mature knowledge seeker, this is designed to try and streamline the many thousands of hours of knowledge and training and education that we have compiled in our archives. And as such, we try to make it easier because we don't all have the time to invest, but we do want to be effective because the time is running out. Today's subject is the harvest. And the question is, what are we harvesting? So one of the time pressures, of course, is that in our plan to launch to the moon on June the 6th is only T-minus 42 days and counting away. And so this is increasing the pressure that we have on our trip to the moon. And it's also increasing our pressure in forcing us to leave our warm and fuzzy nest and to learn how to fly with the rest of the universe. So can we do that? Do we want to do that? And so we need some special compasses to do that navigation. And so, you know, part of the thing about the pressure comes from the schedule, but there's another pressure here in Canada, and I keep making reference to it. And you wonder where that comes from. And that is the May 2-4 weekend that's coming up. This is a very important day. And so it causes us a lot of anxiety, and then sometimes to waylay that anxiety, then we create a May 2-4 weekend every weekend. And so this is just another May 2-4 weekend. And what the 2-4 stands for is for K severe. There's 24 bottles of beer in the case. And so this becomes part and parcel of the welfare essentials for life. So we seem to think that air, water, food, and shelter are the essentials of life. And so there are those who feed this. We call them the providers. And there are those who deny this, and we call them the terrorists. But not everyone shares the importance of these essentials. So many on welfare, for them, the essentials are having the smokes, which are slang for cigarettes, have to have the beer, have to have the snacks to go along with the beer. And these are the essentials. And of course, to sit in front of the cable TV and watch the world go by. And so we have to question now, what is the default position? Are we feeders? Are we terrorists? Or are we just welfare passengers? And how can we tell which is which? And so really, when we look at the situation, whatever that situation is, this is what we are harvesting. Or is that what we are reaping? And so this is causing a lot of pressure. And so as to be able to deal with this pressure, many of us want to get intoxicated, because really that doesn't confront the pressure, that just helps us deal with the pressure. And this pressure is universal. And so when we played the game of musical chairs, we like to throw things away. So as we went through each round, we would remove a chair and take it somewhere, we don't know where. And of course, one of the participants would be eliminated, and where they go, we don't know. And the idea was to declare a winner. But in the pressure fields of life, you can't throw anything away. So you really have to deal with that. And so as such, then the pressure mounts. And when you have the increase in pressure, then plasmatically that creates a gravitational field. And so the gravitational field gravitates towards the center. And so as we get to this central position, we find that the fields inside have a smaller diameter. And so we can't put the same number of people on each field. So if we start out with 8 participants, and then we go down one, and we find that we can't put that many on there. So we have to actually overload and cross over to another field. So if we're just going down one level, we find that we have 2 left over. And then if we go down another level, now we have 4 left over. And why is this? Well, it's because people keep coming. More and more people are coming to the game. This is not an exclusive game. You know, this is the game of life. And so when it comes down to all the fields being filled with humanity, and then we have leftovers, well, where exactly do they go? And a decision has to be made where they go. So, you know, one of the decisions could be they could be discarded. And the other decision could be no decision. But that decision is not available because you see, we add more pressure. And so more players want to get into the game. And so a decision has to be made. And so if this decision is not made, this creates a point of conflict. And that conflict in the reality, the scheme of things, the grand scheme of things, it becomes fairly temporary. And so it becomes a flashpoint. And so we say when two forces come together on a certain plane, something has to give. And so in that process of giving, where does it go? And is it just a flash in the pan, or is it a glow? And so we're seeing that we have other points of view that we can throw into this. And as the pressure is increasing with respect to the timetable, we find that we really don't have time to be inebriated, drunk, if you will. And there are various ways to be drunk, of course. So one of the ways to be drunk is with beer. Another way is to be drunk with drugs. Another way to be drunk, of course, is with power. And so if we want to follow the leader, we need to make sure that that leader is moral and sober. And if we want to be a teacher, that means we have to be that leader. And how could we be that leader? And how could we be that teacher without having been a student first? And so this whole process of life is basically to show how life works. And so here we are at the threshold of entering into the uncharted skies. And can you hear it? Can you see it? Can you make the right choices? Well, what is the default choice? And why do you have to make a choice? Because you have to position yourself. And can you sort this out? Or do we have to get elevated? And so the road ahead can be pretty rough. How's your compass working? Are you ready to harvest? Or are you reaping? And so as we discuss, we have to figure out how we can tune into the energy of the universe and turn on to the benevolence of the Creator and drop out of our arrogance, which is limiting our growth. Because if you remember, one of the favorite questions when we talk about the beginning of matter, we say, oh, well, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And so the answer was neither. What came first was the principal matter. And that's why the principal matter is called the principal matter, because it's first. And where did this principal matter come from? So we find that there is a magnetical feeding, and then find that there's a gravitational feedback. Because at some point in between the magnetical feeding and the gravitational feedback, there is a conversion point. And so this conversion point is a convergence of energies into force fields. And so we call these force fields the principal matter, the transition matter, and for the sake of clarity, the mattergen matter, because these are all part of the plasma-gen conversion of energy. And what determines if it is matter-gen or if it is matter state? And that has to do with the interaction of the environment. And that environment is done through a field interaction, which we call inertia. And so this is the basis of the plasma science. And what we've been trying to do is describe a method so that you can, in your own words, explain to people, not necessarily as a teacher, and not as a dictator, but as a guide, to guide us through our soul limitations. Because the ultimate guide is our soul, you see. And what our soul is trying to do is to somehow rationalize the emotion of the past, the emotion of the future. And so that becomes the emotion of presence. But is the emotion of presence hanging on to the past, or is it just hanging on? And we find that with our souls, that we actually have two souls. We have the soul of the man, and we have the soul of the body. The soul of the body is different from the physical body. So in fact, we have three bodies. The soul of the man body, the soul of the body, and the physical body. And you can see that we're all very busy bodies. And so there's a system that is feeding these bodies, and these bodies are feeding back. And so this is the inertia. However, this inertia, which created us, was based on trust. And so somehow, some way, because we are all independent variables, we see that we can transfer this trust to a point of contrivance or a connivance. And so we have really transformed our emotion of presence into a conflict. And so we have a universal harvesting that is designed to enhance the self. And we have a man-made harvesting of loose harvesting that is designed for self-consumption. And so our life is in between these two extremes. And so we find that the energy of the universe comes together and creates the three basic dimensions of the X, Y, and Z axis. But what we didn't say is if that's a plasma reality or a physical reality. We just said it's three dimensions. And in those three dimensions, this is our sphere of reference. This is our field of reference. And because it is our field of reference, and our field also consists of these three dimensions, because those are our fields, the soul of the man, the soul of the body, and the physical body, then we find that our fields of three dimensions and the field of reference of three dimensions are not the same fields. And so this created a point of conflict. But conflict can mean a lot of things. It doesn't just mean war. There can be conflicts of interest. And there can be conflicts between inventors and investors. And then, of course, there's always the shareholders. I'd say all this revolves around in our tiny, perfect world, where really the bottom line is food security. Because the food security is really part of our life's essentials. But, you know, after we eat the food is gone. And so the question is where did it go? So in essence, the point of conflict is actually the vanishing point, because somehow, some way that conflict is resolved, and we can't always see how that happens. And so we always have a choice. Do we create more conflict or do we explain it? And so this is all dependent on susceptibility. And so what that means is that if we can create different energy levels, And if we can do that within our dimension, then how do we know this? And because all of us who are in attendance are aware of what GANS is, and they've seen the hole in the GANS. Because the GANS, it seems like it's vanished. Or is the GANS actually now transparent? Or is that something that has supplemented or supplanted, excuse me, has something supplanted the GANS in there? And is there a soul in that hole? So with all of these questions, we're trying to figure out this vanishing point, which we see is actually the crossroads between the verification point 2, which we transmit, and the validation point from which we transition. And the crossover point becomes our point of transit, point of existence, which is actually the transmutation between the physical reality and the plasma reality. And since the balance of these fields is invisible, what we see with respect to our confirmation is the representation of our soul limitations. And so our soul limitations are really based on what we confirm. And how can you confirm that which you cannot see or that which you cannot hold? And so that point of confirmation that is non-visible is the Maggrav condition. And so whichever reality you're operating in is from that reality position. The common reality position in our society is food security. So as this is an intermediate class and much more advanced, we will just highlight the basics here. And so we've identified the common denominator with respect to those who provide, those who deny, or those on welfare. And all three have the common denominator that food is required for sustenance. But not just that, we also need food for thought. And we need to be thoughtful because there's something missing. And so if we understand in the plasma science that what we understand from the physical science being the atom, in other words, the combination of the electron proton, and if we change our point of view and see how that respects to our transmission, transition, and transmutation, so we see that the speed of rotation of the plasma of the electron is dictated by the amount of the magnetic fields, which are transferred from the large twin plasma of the proton to the plasma of the smaller twin plasma of the electron. So the transfer of energy is really the fundamental principle. And to transfer energy, there have to be two. So it's a fundamental principle of the twinity. And so we have a singular viewpoint. And that viewpoint seems to be only our body. What we don't see is this crossover point because it disappears. We rationalize it with the letter pi, which means that the relationship of the diameter, which is the transition, and the circumference, which is the transmission, is roughly 3 and a bit. And we can't rationalize this bit, so we just keep fudging it. But it helps us to understand the geometries of other things, which we haven't taken into account. And we need to practice our target shooting because the target is moving. We have emotions, which represent co-creation, and we have soul dimensions as well. So if we limit ourselves to the 2 dimensions of a circle, we talk about the area perimeter relationship. And then if we expand to 3 dimensions of a sphere and see the relationship of the surface to volume ratio, and if we understand that we are none of these 3 dimensions, then we as the observer, and to understand we are the fudging things, we are in the 4th dimension because we're the observer of the 3 dimensions. And so this is the difference when we're looking at the energy transfer. The energy transfer of these basic dimensions, they have to transmutate between the field strength of one set of 3 dimensions to the field strength of another set of 3 dimensions. Because the plasma operates through field strength. And the direction and strength of flow is based on both the charge gradient and the gradient charge. Now, it's not double talk. That's just the interaction between 2 fields. And that interaction is a dynamic plasma reaction. And so the relationship between these 2 fields has to have a reference. And then the reaction of the interaction of the energy in motion is dependent on the synergy that is derived from this interaction or the susceptibility that is derived from the difference of these interactions. And this relationship reference can be done within the range on this planet, within our physicality. And we see that we can transcend various dimensions without leaving our physicality. But we know that there are other dimensions. And how do we transcend those dimensions? So the rules are the same. The plasma rule is the higher strength field feeds the weaker strength field. So if the higher strength field is the feeder, what feeds the higher strength field? And if the weaker is fed by the higher strength, then what does the weaker do? And so failing to understand this is to fail to understand the creation of the universe, you see, because the universe exists from energy. So when we look at book number 1, the universal order of creation of matters, this explains how the universe is created. So energy is always in motion. And so that motion is a charge. And so energy is a charge in motion, but it's a 2-way street, but not on the same dimension. And so therefore, there are different dimensions from the physical dimensions. There are plasma dimensions. And within the domains of the plasma dimensions, there are different dimensions. And so if we understand only one dimension, and we say that the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, and so if we stay on the same dimension and understanding the rules of transmission, transition, and transmutation, we find that there are 2 points of conflict. There's a point of conflict at the transition point, and there's a point of conflict at the transmission point. And so this brings on enormous pressure. And so there has to be a release. And so when we look at a somatoscope and not only see 30,000 times the magnification, but 125,000 times the magnification, we can see these tiny bodies. And because this is done in motion, it's a picture in motion. We call it a video. We can actually see a live blood sample that is living. And as such, as a living organism, there is motion. And so these dots that are between these big circles, the big circles being the red blood cells. And interestingly enough, all what we see from these red blood cells is really the perimeter. We see nothing in the center, but we know that something has to be in the center because there's a ring around it. So nothing can be nothing. So just like the hole in the Gans, there's a hole in the red blood cell. And when you look at this picture, it's not even red. So the question now becomes, which came first, the red blood cell or the somatid? And what we do know from the somatoscope is that the somatid came from the red blood cell. Okay, so that's in physicality. But there's nothing inside the red blood cell, is there? So how did all this happen? So we ask the same question as farmers. Farmers plant seeds. The planting of seeds, we say, we sow the seeds. And of course, a popular statement is, we reap what we sow. And that comes from the original harvester, the scythe. As you can see pictured here, you just grab onto those two handles and you swing it from the pivot point of where you stand to the rotating blade, which kind of cuts through the field. Isn't that interesting? And so this reaping, it refers to grains, wheat, and grass. And so by definition, a reaper is any farm machine that cuts grain. And so the early reapers, as we're seeing in this picture, just simply cut the crop and dropped it where it was unbound. And so through our technology, we have been able to develop modern machines that include harvesters, combines, and binders, which also perform other harvesting operations to make us more productive for the purposes of producing more. And so I'm only going to use a couple of examples here. So getting back to the chickens and the egg thing, the chickens eat the grain. And some of these chickens lay the eggs, and so we can harvest the eggs. And then some of the chickens we call meat chickens. And those chickens we slaughter. And so we as humans, we can eat the eggs or we can eat the chicken meat. And cattle do the same thing, basically. Cattle eat the grass. And the cows produce the milk and we harvest the milk. And then we raise the beef for meat. And once it comes to the appropriate size, we slaughter the cattle. And so from this, we drink the milk and eat the meat. So as humans, we are working to harvest the crops. So some of these crops feed the chickens, and some of these crops feed the cattle. But some of these crops produce the bread and allows us to make sandwiches. And so, yeah, we can make a chicken sandwich, we can make a beef sandwich, or we can make a fried egg sandwich. And then, of course, there's the barley sandwich, which is slang for beer. And then we could produce other sandwiches, which we produce drugs. And so as humans, we could drink the beer, smoke the plants, or take the drugs. But there's other types of harvesting. Mining, for instance. The crops are minerals, oil, or natural gas, or precious metals. It's really basically the same thing, because it's harvesting from the bounty of the earth, isn't it? And then we as humans can take that bounty and run it through a manufacturing process, which really only just changes the appearance, so we can take the food and produce other food products with it. Or we can take the elements that we mine and produce machines or devices or weapons. So this is another type of harvesting. So we want to be inclusive, where the harvesting includes things that we come from our environment here. And so there are byproducts from this harvesting. And so some of these byproducts are called forms of elimination. So we know about manure, methane gas, garbage. There are mine tailings, and then some of the manufactured products end up in the scrapyard. And so all of this stuff that we harvest could end up in the scrap bin. And so really the dividend from all this energy that we're expending on harvesting ends up as waste. And so that's the point today, is waste to harvest dividend. So this is a huge problem on this planet. And it becomes a point of opportunity, you see. And of course, the real promoters of this problem want to go into space and travel to Mars. And what they want to do is to use the technology to terraform Mars. And we're not talking about the Keshe Foundation here. We're talking about the same people who designed the biosphere in Arizona, which was a miserable failure of terraforming Earth. So these same people who can't terraform Earth want to terraform Mars. And so there's something wrong here, and it has to do with not understanding the daisy chain harvest. And that is, we harvest the vertical people, which we call the plants. And then we harvest the horizontal people, which we call the, shall we say, the cattle. And then our role in there is as human people. And all three of these produce waste. But what is the source of all this that we produce? And so we find that it all comes from the bounty of the earth. But the bounty of the earth is coming in conjunction with the radiance of the sun. But the radiance of the sun only shines for out of the 24 hours a day, only shines for a percentage of that, which goes from anywhere from 30% to 60%. So the rest of the time it doesn't shine. But the vertical people operate 24 hours a day, as do the horizontal people. Well, so do we. But what is interesting is that the vertical people do this seasonally. In other words, when the winter comes, the vertical people withdraw back into the ground and hibernate. There are horizontal people that do this, like a bear. A bear will hibernate. And when you hibernate, it's hibernating in a place of darkness. So there's no sunshine there. So how does he exist? And for such a long time, which could be several months. And then there's human people, and we hibernate. Well, we really only hibernate at nighttime, when we go to sleep. So we're living all seasons. So the question then is, how is this possible to have these variable points of sleep, these varying points of suspended animation, without the energy of the sun? Because basically the vertical people are under the snow, so they don't see the sunlight. The horizontal people are hiding in their caves, they don't see the sunlight. And the human people, well, I think most of us sleep at night, so it's dark. And so how does this happen? So something is missing. So we are part of this connection that we can see, but there's another part of the connection which is causing energy to come in and energy to go out. And what we do know is with the waste that goes out, that some of this waste, well, we can burn it. And when we burn it, we create light and heat. And so that becomes an energy. But that waste becomes consumed. And so this whole process involves the consumption of the vertical people, the consumption of the horizontal people, consumption by the human people, and then if we're clever enough, consumption of the waste that we produce. But, we didn't produce the earth, and we didn't produce the sun, and we are dependent on the earth for our environment, and we're dependent on the sun for the life-giving energy. And so there's an interdependence of ourselves with the rest of the universe, and this we can't see. But what we see now is that what we are really harvesting is this energy from beyond the sun. And so that is the gravitational energy coming in. And what we are sending out is the energy beyond the waste, which is magnetical. And where exactly is that going? And do we have to engage the sun, the earth, the vertical people, and the horizontal people? Do we have to engage all of these steps to get this gravitational energy from beyond the sun? And do we have to go through this waste and waste handling process to get to beyond the energy output? So from our point of view as humans, what we want is the energy coming in and the energy going out. The way we get this energy, or the way we give this energy is our choice. And some of us choose to provide, some of us choose to deny, and some of us are just in there for the welfare ride. But all of us have this connection, except for one small little detail. We don't know where we came from, and we don't know where we're going, because there is an energy in motion. And so we know that there's a pressure from energy to come in from somewhere into our tiny perfect world. And we also know that there's an energy pressure to go outside of our tiny perfect world. And so this becomes the basis of understanding our two-way street. This all has to do with plasmatic energy flowing magnetically through the principles of attraction and repulsion. And so we said it's a two-way street because there's a natural creation and there's a natural decay. So the natural creation is an emission from a Maggrav position. And we know that a Maggrav condition is a balance of the attraction repulsion forces. And then there's an absorption, which is gravitational flow from a Maggrav position, which we know is a combination of the repulsion attraction forces. And so which way are we going? It doesn't matter. Because when we look at understanding the nuclear decay of a neutron, we see that we have a fundamental plasma that in the process of decay creates an electron-proton combination, which we call an atom. And so what we find from our physical science is that an atom can be an electron-proton combination, or can be an electron-proton-neutron combination. And in the process of maintaining whichever field strength that we wish to create, there's always a release of PM ticks. This is the decay process. But in the process of decay means a creation of something else. And so we find that whichever way the motion is moving, that even if it's a creation, it's a two-way street. And if it's a decay, it's a two-way street. So there is a bond between these two-way streets because there's a connection from the creation on one side and the decay on the other side. But is it just the decay, or is there a binding of the creation from one side and the creation of the same side? And is there an equal opposite binding, what we call as a covalent bond? So there's a bonding where we look at the higher field strength is bonding to the weaker field strength. And so it's bonding individually and collectively, isn't it? And that's why you have now all of these components as being bonded together into one. So this is where we can go into the multiple dimensions, and then we can transcend the various dimensions from a certain point. So created in the cups of life, and why I bring this subject up every day is because it's a very important subject. We all need to do this now, and even more than before, because in these cups of life, we have the basic three dimensions, which we supply the cup and the components of the cup and the configuration. And what we get is we get a magnetical and a gravitational field force that is derived from that through using the nanotechnology. And with the nanotechnology, we create various cups of life, which are starting to show us that there's an emotional aspect in addition to our physical aspect. And if we wish to concentrate on either one, then keep the cups of life apart by at least a meter so that you can make the appropriate ganses inside the cups of life. But regardless of which cup of life you are creating, there is a gans that is inside, there is an amino acid, and then anytime you create the amino acid, you also create the water. And so what the amino acid eventually becomes is this protein. And this protein is what we are really harvesting, because when we're harvesting an egg, it is protein. We harvest a chicken, it is protein. And we harvest a cow, it is protein. And you know what? We are protein. And so that is the connection between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. But then there's energy beyond. And that energy beyond is what comes from our soul. And not one soul, but two souls. So what we have is each cup has its own soul. That each cup and its own soul is the body of the cup. And the cups, the 5 cups together, which we see the cup of the soul, the cup of emotion, the cup of physicality, the cup of inertia, and the cup of the earth, collectively create a magnetical field and a gravitational field, and as such also has a soul. And so we have this plasma interaction, which is stemming from a default position of the matter plasma. And that default position is the feeding position. So the matter state physical position, which is a touchy-feely type thing, is the feedback position. So the matter gen state, which is plasmatic, is the feeding system. And so we try and figure out, well, what part of this matter are we? And what is the common denominator of us? And how does this all work? So we seem to think that we've mastered the harvesting, except that we have problems with food security on this planet. So is it a technological problem? Or is it an understanding problem? And so if we understand that the energy of the universe comes from the default soul pack, which is an energy pack that is traveling through the universe and carries with it the spice of life. And this spice of life is composed of different aminogens, because there are different composite plasma charges. And all of these plasma charges dilute together and create the indomitable spirit. And the dream energy of the spirit comes from the default position of the soul. And so our physicality is the combination, manifestation from the combination of the spirit and the soul. And so we have the 2 positions here where we have created a stacker unit, which is the 5 cups in a stacker unit, which represents our feeding system. And we have the universal cup, which is field-based exclusively. And that is also the feeding system. So we have 2 feeding systems, and one physical destination system. And so that becomes the feedback system. So with two feeding systems and one feedback system. And that is representative of our three dimensions. And we are very good at that. Fortunately, our cells are doing this, and they've had a lot of target practice. So in summary, really the MAGRAV feeding conversion is where the energy is coming in and more energy keeps coming in through the gravitational field force of attraction. And in that process, we absorb this energy. But if we want to maintain our MAGRAV position, then we have to magnetically repel this energy and emit it out. And more has to be emitted out. And so how effective we are at this energy convergence and how susceptible we are is dependent on our skill level, our awareness and understanding how the energy is flowing magnetically and gravitationally. And so we see that it's easy to explain the sun because we can see the presence of the sun. But what happens when we don't have the sun, in the absence of the sun? So we have what we call the irradiation of the other energy fields. So we have the reflection of the sun off of the moon. We also have the earth shine, and we have the soul shine. And so we will have something to talk about, because when we look at how plants, how the vertical people operate above the ground, they absorb the energy from the sun. But at night, below the ground, they absorb the energy of the earth. And so this becomes a two-way street. And so when you look at the rainbows and you see that a double rainbow is arcing in parallel. So if you had a rainbow reflection, it would not be normal. You would have to turn the picture upside down. And so that tells you how things work. And because we can see from one side of the rainbow to the other side of the rainbow, when we have two rainbows, then that part in between, we can see right through it. And so if we can see right through it, that means we have to cross over from inside of the first rainbow to in between the two rainbows. And then if we go from in between the two rainbows to the outside of the second rainbow, we have to cross over again. And we find that because these rainbows have the color sequence opposite, where in the first one, the violet is on the inside. In the second rainbow, the violet is on the outside. So this becomes the point of inversion. And because you can see that the color is much darker in between the two rainbows, that becomes the transmission area of the peace dome. And so the peace dome cannot operate in the physicality. So it has to be elevated and transcend to another dimension. And that dimension has to be in the fourth dimension, because it cannot be part of the third dimensions, because the three dimensions are in the physicality. And if you, as a human, are in the point of physicality, and you, at the point of death, want to cross over what we call the bardo, crossing over into the other dimension, please remember to take your body with you. This is a new revelation. Well, new to me, sorry, I must qualify that, because what we're seeing now is that when we're looking at the creation of matter, and we think that's the source, but then we look at the origin of the universe, and that's the soul, and then the structure of light as being the link in between the two, or could it be backwards, or could it be upside down? And is your compass twirling? Does it know which way is up, or has it vanished? And so the default point of view is that of the soul, because the soul never dies. So it is the dynamic plasma state of the soul which interacts with the plasma state of the spirit, the soul of the body, and converges through the point of conversion and transmutes into the physical body of transportation. So in other words, for the physical body of transportation to operate, it has to stay within its field. If you want to transcend to another field, if you want to transport to another dimension, then it has to transmutate into a different field strength. And we know that because we see that we have an emotional component. And when I say that we see the emotional component, we only feel it, but we can't touch it. It's the physical component that we can touch. And the soul component is the default point of view. So our point of view is from our point of view, whereas the Earth's point of view is from the Earth's point of view. And so the Earth's point of view is from the three dimensions of the Earth. And that is our feedback system, because that's our environment. And our point of view is the feedback system, because that's our three dimensions. And so the transmission of energy to these feedback systems is coming from this in-between point. And this in-between point is feeding the two things that are not physical, the two things that are not visible. So we have a feeding of the soul of the man, and we have a feeding of the soul of the body. And as such, we have a feedback of the physical body of the man and the physical body of the earth. So whatever we're harvesting includes all of these components. And we discount that which we cannot see. And we do this at our peril, because it affects the rate of transmission. And so we find that if we can change the rate of transmission by enlisting the services of the feeding soul of intention and the feedback environment that we have, we can enhance not only the physicality, but we can enhance the environment. And not only, because this becomes a manifestation predetermined by the emotion of presence. And if the motion of presence is dictated by the feedback, we are discounting that immensely, because we're only getting the feedback feeding. The feedback feeding, as opposed to what? The feeding. The feeding of the feeding. Because in all cases, we're getting fed and we nurture this. And so we've come to a point of dilemma, because as farmers, we find that we are the hands that nurture the crop. But we know that scientifically, if the hand that nurtures the crop becomes the hand that harvests the crop will not be very happy with the farmer. That is scientifically proven. Well, the soldier also has a dilemma, because the hand of the soldier that kills the man, when does that hand become the hand that caresses his child? What's the difference? What is the difference? And this becomes a dilemma. And so with this dilemma, we find that the difference really is in the way we exchange energy. So we find that for the benefit of our shareholders, we are binding at the expense of others. We are binding energy at the expense of others. And the best way, the most effective way to do that is by double crossing and deceiving. And when we become witnesses to that, then we become accomplices. Unless we can do something. And so we have the three dimensions of killing, jealousy, and kingship. And they make the default pathway totally disappear. And so, can this change? And we are at the vanishing point of change. And suddenly what we're saying is that you are harvesting at this vanishing point of change. And if what you're harvesting is not visible, what are we doing? Because if we can't tell the difference between the hand that nurtures and the hand that harvests, then what stops us from having this conditional feedback of loose harvesting, sex trafficking, organ harvesting, or confiscation, and like an emotional harvesting? Or we can resort to this effective feeding of unconditionality, the universal plasma feeding, the soul plasma feeding, with the morality feedback. The morality feedback is the reality feedback. And that's what we're talking about. Because there's a feeding radiance of energy. There's a feedback radiance of energy. This is how the dynamic plasma works. From the gravitational point inside to the magnetic fields outside. And so when we've seen how by flattening the fields, we have this shimmering, we have this interaction between the field inside and the field outside. And we find that the energy still has to flow. It can't stop. And in order to negotiate the turn, it has to flow either inside or outside, or both. And because we are navigating from a point of Magrath, then there has to be a feedback. And so this is how, as we navigate around that turn, some of the energy has to come back in. And when we say some of the energy, we don't specify which energy or how much, but it has a composite energy. In other words, different field strengths. And so not only does it come back, but it also is emitted out. and it has an interaction there. And not only, but it has a feedback that comes from a radiance from outside. And so we have the feeding from within, and we have the feeding from without. And both of those feedings feed back in. And they feed back from both sides, not just the side that is shining. And the reason for it is because, first of all, it's a Maggrav condition, the balance of the dimensions, the balance of the magnetical gravitational field forces, but also because these fields are rotating. So they are sharing the benefit of the feeding radiance from inside and from outside collectively. And it's an ongoing process. And so the sequence then comes down to understanding that the soul of the sun plus the soul of the earth attracts the soul of the man. All right, so now we have the convergence of the soul of the man into a particular plasmatic position. And it is from there that the soul of the man can interact with the soul of the earth and attracts the second dimension, the soul of the body. And the soul of the body becomes an inversion of the soul of the man. And then we take the soul of the body with the soul of the earth, and we can now manifest the physicality of the body within the physicality of the earth. And so this becomes the default pathway manifestation from the soul of the man to the soul of the body to the physical body, which is basically the divergence of energy within the environment, whatever that environment may be. And so when we harvest or when we reap, and sometimes they say, well, eventually we're going to meet the Grim Reaper. And the Grim Reaper is known as the one who sows the seeds of discontent. And if we reap what we sow, and if we use the scythe, then one of the ways that we can harvest this discontent is to cut them off at the knees, or sabotage, if you will. But you see, for each and every one of us, there is a judgment day. And the Green Reaper says, well, someday you're going to meet your maker. And the maker will tell you, well, you will reap the reward. So we call this Grim Reaper, sometimes we call the angel of death. But there are many angels that are associated with death, as they say, in a positive and negative context, because we really have to understand what death means. And so man has another dilemma. We spend all this energy nurturing the body, and we do that with the same hands that eventually buries the body. Not our hands, someone else's hands. And so the question then becomes is, what is the common denominator between those who provide, those who deny, and those on welfare? And so there is a harvest dividend from all the activity. But is the wasting of the body that dividend? And who is responsible? During the course of the life, you are responsible for nurturing, for being that farmer, for being that provider. Even as a terrorist, you have to provide for your band. And even if you're on welfare, you have to have a means of providing that welfare check so that you can make sure that you can pay your cable TV and buy that case of 2-4, so that you can get drunk and so you don't have to face the reality. Because when you are awake to the reality you have responsibility. The responsibility comes with understanding how energy is transferred. And so we have physical limitations within our science, but the universal laws transcend these limitations because they involve the ethos of the universe, which involves morality, compassion, courage. These are the essentials of creation. And we find that if we increase one side, we have to increase the other side. You can't maintain universal constancy. There's no such thing because energy is always in motion. And so, when we're talking about angels, there are angel investors, there are angel providers, and there are man-made laws. But which laws and which man? Is it the politician, or is it the farmer, or is it the welfare man? But there is a universal law, and that really affects the role of man. And so with the plasma science, we have been able to change the role of man by using the vertical enhancement and the horizontal enhancement units to provide a function, which will allow us to harvest more. Be aware of the soul harvest, which is the connection between the source and the physical reality. The source, which operates in the plasma reality, and our body enhancement and material enhancement, which operates in the physical reality. And so the only way that we can transcend these is through the plasma science, because we are operating in a state of ignorance. And we say that ignorance is when you're unaware. And so that's the purpose of these teachings. But if you're aware and unwilling, that is also ignorant. Because it's not a matter that you can't cross the bridge of knowing, it's you don't want to cross the bridge of knowing. And that involves a kind of corruption. And don't worry, you can't insult the ignorant. It is time to be responsible. And one of the hindrances to being awake is that, and being aware is the onset of responsibility. And we don't want that responsibility societally, because then we have to cross the bridge of knowing. But why do so many want to cross the bridge of knowing? What is that energy that is causing us to cross this bridge? Because we can't see it. This energy is transparent. And so this is the road to transparency. So we understand that the universe is a collection of energy force fields, which we are harvesting through the plasma dilution process. And so we know this connection because we are all becoming more and more qualified in understanding the art of dreaming. And we know that we do this because the plants do it seasonally, the bears do it seasonally, and we do it in our sleep period. And so indeed, there is a transition between the earth space and the outer space. This point in between we call the inner space. The inner space is actually the plasmagen state, the point of transmutation of energy that is allowing us to go from where we are to where we could be. And, as always, it'd be nice to take our garbage with us. And so the vision enhancement unit is the first step in helping us do this, because it's difficult to enhance the soul when the spirit is hurt. And the spirit is hurt by being the pain to the witness of the poor harvesting practices that we have. So this lends itself to a default pathway manifestation. And so we are proposing a gift to the US military for PTSD recovery via this plasma gen interaction. So now you understand better how to define a plasma. And a plasma of any kind is a kind of energy state. And yes, it's important. And if that is not important, then really nothing is important, because what we have is now an understanding of the relationship, what we call a magrev, which is the balance between the magnetical and gravitational field forces. And there is a scientific responsibility that comes with understanding the conservation of energy and the conservation of magnetic fields. But there's also a spiritual responsibility of understanding how the spirit drives the soul. And it is the plasma science which adds to this knowledge. So what is the rate of change and what can affect that? So it becomes our skill at harvesting. And so what are we really trying to harvest? Is we're trying to harvest the relationship of understanding the relationship between inner space and outer space and earth space, and how our emotional and physical context works with the soul of the body. So we have a new adventure coming into our sphere. The pressure is increasing. June the 6th is T-minus 42 days and counting. And so we are now at this point where we become this conflict between materialization and dematerialization. And it's not a war conflict. It's an understanding conflict, because we want to go beyond the vanishing point from this point of transparency and back and forth. So now we understand how manifestation is represented in the perception of the stacker and the universal reality. Two fields, when they come together, form in any other field. That is the manifestation. So there's a feeding system to that, right? So there's a plasma feeding externally, and there's a plasma feeding internally. And in both cases, it leads to manifestation. And it may be tangible or non-tangible. It may be visible or non-visible. It may be plasmatic or physical. But in all cases, there is a plasmatic reality. And maybe there's a physical reality, because this manifestation, which we say is a form artifact, is a touchy-feely form artifact. But we can feel the emotion of presence as well, and we can't touch that. So the emotions of presence is also a form artifact of what? Energy and motion. And so the Universal Council is also trying to connect this between the earth space and the outer space, and is trying to organize the compass to point in the right direction, not only the earth humans, but the universal community, because there's a feeding and a feedback, and it comes from both. This is how we know this, the difference between inner space and outer space. It's this connection, the feeding and the feedback between our universe and the universal universe. There is no direct connection. It is a contiguous connection, and it is constantly energy in motion. And this is how we can transcend the cellular division, the cellular division of creation and the cellular division of decay. And so when we transcend this understanding of the cellular division, it is not just the harvesting of protein. call it radar love, because it comes from above. Through the peace stone, this point of emotional transformation between the magnetical field forces and the gravitational field forces, and where we see now the adoption of a point of responsibility because of the awareness. And this is something that should be welcome. This should be welcome because it facilitates the transmutation of the aminogen and the carbogen into the post-amino acid state of our physicality, heaven on earth, or wherever we go. That's our responsibility. This is the greater oneness that we're trying to achieve. So not only is what we feed in terms of the radiance, but the feedback that we get from this radiance. This feedback only comes back from the common good. And the feeding goes out from the common good, because this is what we want to do. We want to get back to the normal. Normal is the default position, and the majority of us are normal. And you know that because the majority seek freedom and emancipation. And the universe is normal. And so being on Earth in a context, we see that the Earth is also seeking freedom and emancipation. So we have an existential crisis, but the default position of that existential crisis is to harvest the plasma energy of the plasma universe. So in other words, we are the farmers of the magnetical residue of the fields of attraction and repulsion, which is nothing more than the convergence and divergence of gravitational and magnetical field forces. And each one of us is an independent variable in an interdependent universe. So which allows us, and all we need to do is just to reach one, but we can reach many. And then have an emotional transformation where we only need to teach one, but we can teach many. Because the transmission of this plasma energy transcends one nation, one planet, and one universe. We are all the investors in this particular club that we call the universe. And as such, the Kesh Foundation Spaceship Institute is delivering plasma science on Earth here. So we're calling all the Earth shareholders, both near and far. There's a world peace treaty. Sign it. This is the harvest time. Physical and emotional transformation rate depends on the source and balance of the feeding and the feedback systems. And the default position listens to the universal language of freedom. And that is why the plasma science needs to be delivered in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome everybody to the outer space age. That is not only the end of the lesson, but this is the end of the Intermediate Insight series. Thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed the trip.
Thank you, Alex, for this teaching on the harvest. Hopefully some people have some questions for you. I think you're finished, yes?
I am.
Okay, while we let you warm up your tea or whatever you have to do, we usually ask at this point if there's anyone here for the first time, if you'd like to share your name, where you're from, and how you found this meeting. And then we'll go back to Alex for some questions. Okay, I guess everyone has been here before. And who would like to open up something on this understanding of the harvest? I've tried to absorb things from maybe oranges and other things. And I know we've shown the orange in the cup and more. Do you think it's, and we're not really taking from the orange itself, are we? We're taking from the fields that the orange is giving out, maybe like some sort of radiance around the orange. We're not really taking from the orange. And I was thinking, well, first of all, I think that it will happen a lot easier when we're more elevated and then the plants are more elevated as they start to be watered with the GANs and so on and so forth. But when you have a piece of meat that's dead or, you know, has been cut up into pieces, can we still take from that? Or is the radiance maybe gone after you pick the orange? It still is able to radiate some fields outside itself. And of course, it's my lack of understanding in how to do some of these things. But it would be a much better position, I think, for our health. And we wouldn't be eating a soul. We'd just be absorbing the fields that the orange or whatever doesn't need, as I understand it.
So this is a terrific question, Mark, because several times we've talked about the somatoscope and the discoveries of Gaston Nason's, but I think we all understand the difference between a photograph and a video and the benefits of it. So, you know, we say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, it still doesn't tell the whole story, and even a video doesn't always tell the whole story, but it is a much better storyteller. So this is why we do an audiovisual presentation for this class. But when we look at a somatoscope, the key difference is that the microscopes that the hospitals use take photographs of dead blood. The somatoscope takes a video of live blood. I think you can see the difference, especially in terms of interpreting what is happening. And, you know, you need to understand that the somatoscope is legal for use in hospitals. And the information that we're conveying goes back to before even 1989. And one of the revelations that I found in 1989 was that specifically this subject that you're talking about, the growth of meat, which you say is dead meat. And so, yes, it was possible. And I think you found in one of the plasma reactor groups that that was exactly what was happening, that the protein was literally growing in the MagRev unit. And so when we seen that in the plasma reactor unit, know that that wasn't the first time that, you know, Gaston Nason's has showed this to happen more than 30 years ago. So we don't actually have to grow the cow or slaughter the cow to produce the meat. The thing is that we're still missing the morality factor. So I don't want to offer an opinion on this, but the thing is, I'm sure all of us still eat food, and there is a rate of change that we have to go through. So there are repercussions if the change is too sudden. And this is why we use the vertical, horizontal, and visual enhancement units to facilitate our transition. But our understanding can change very rapidly. And so we have to become more skillful in how we use this knowledge. So fundamentally, you are correct in terms of we don't actually have to harvest the plant or the animal to gain the benefit of that, because literally what we're looking for is the energy. But what I tried to point out with a simple explanation is that the chicken actually eats the grain. So the horizontal animal eats the vertical animal. And the cow eats the grass. So the horizontal animal eats the vertical animal. We have the option, because we're both vertical and horizontal, we eat both. We eat the vertical and the horizontal. But quite literally, even when we eat the horizontal animal, that horizontal animal is eating the vertical animal. So we are actually eating the vertical beings via the horizontal being.
I agree. I think it takes 10 pounds of grain to make 1 pound of beef.
Yeah. So why, do we stop that? And can we stop that? And what's really interesting is that both are considered protein. But I think in the general population, when you say protein, you're thinking beef. You're not thinking grain. So the misconception that we have from our teachings has created that perception. So that becomes a perception of reality as opposed to the real reality. But the point I'm trying to say is that if we can bypass the eating of the horizontal people to eat the vertical people, then we can negate that one step. But if we are seeking the energy, and by the same token, if the energy from the cow comes via the energy of the plant, well, the energy of the plant comes from the sun. So we want the energy from the sun, and that comes via the earth, the vertical people, and the horizontal people. So can we bypass all of those? But the energy of the sun comes from beyond the physical sun. So can we bypass the sun as well? And so if this, then that, if this, then that, we just keep on going along that daisy chain, then the bottom line is the transfer of energy from the universal creator and back to the universal creator. And so we become the midpoint. And in terms of that midpoint, we have to have a point to be. And so that midpoint, wherever we are at, is our environment. So the interaction of the creator with our soul and the environment, which can be physical or plasmatic, is the plasmatic position point of wherever we are. And if that is the case, then we certainly can traverse the universe. Because even if we don't know how to do it, we know that we can do it. And the proof is very simple. You were born. Where did you come from? And we know that we die. So where do we go? Because we have to go somewhere. We have to go. We came from a dimension. We have to go to another dimension. And the thing is, we have created a, how shall we say it? We have expended energy in the process. So logically speaking, if we are working so diligently to maintain our existence, it really becomes a logical answer or a logical follow-up question. Why are we so cavalier in discarding the product of all of our work? So, you spend a lifetime nurturing your body, and then at the end of it, you say, well, let's just throw it in the garbage along with the chicken bones, right? And the molded bread. It's all garbage, isn't it? So it's really, in the end, is that what life is? Life is the production of garbage? Is that what we're doing? Is that the purpose of life? You've got to be kidding. I mean, do you believe that? So, we don't ask these hard questions. And the main reason is because we haven't really had any hard answers. But now we are getting some hard answers. And the question then becomes is, well, who do you believe? And what is the proof? Well, you are the knowledge seeker. You are the one who is making the cup of life. And you are a witness. And so you better believe yourself. Because there's one thing that is true. And that is you. You are true to you. But are you true to yourself? Because who is yourself? And if you're only believing in your feedback system, well, what about the feeding system? What about the feeding system that's coming from the universe? What about the feeding system that's coming from your soul? And so these follow the universal laws of morality. Well, if you are operating on man-made laws of immorality, which is not only financially bankrupt, but morally bankrupt and socially bankrupt, then what exactly are you harvesting? So the fruits of your labor manifest themselves. So if you're happy with the fruits of your labor, well, carry on trucking. But, things have to change because we are not alone. The universal community is suffering the same way. And why are they suffering? Don't they have better knowledge than we do? They have different knowledge. They have knowledge that we don't have. And we have knowledge that they don't have.
Right.
And so if we can bring the two together, we now have a different kind of farming. So I apologize to talk so long, but there's an important point that I want to make, you see, because we have a feeling that we have an overpopulation problem and that we have a food security problem. So, is that a problem because of the physical size of the environment, or is that a problem of the technological capabilities that we have? So we have already solved the technical capabilities. And I'm not talking about the plasma science. I'm already just talking about the physical science. The physical science has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that we have the capability and no problem to feed everyone on this planet. But, there are those who deny and those who sabotage. So now we have, in addition to that, a bonus where not only we have the physical science that can feed all of us, but we also have the plasma science that can feed all of us. But this plasma science, what it does is it feeds all of us by conventional means. In other words, harvesting food, right? Harvesting food for the purposes of sustenance. But now the plasma science is also allowing us to have sustenance without the food. So now the whole physical science of being able to provide food for everyone on this planet is redundant. And this is causing another dilemma. So we have two dilemmas. The physical science does not want to recognize that we can feed everybody on this planet. And the physical science doesn't want to recognize the plasma science. You see the problem?
Well, I think we do have enough food. It's just not distributed properly.
No, not the way we're making it. We're not making enough food. And no, it isn't distributed properly. And it is not even nutritional food, right? So for instance, in Canada here, any produce, what we call produce is, vertical people, has to be treated with pesticides or chemicals, whether it's domestically grown or imported. That's the law. That's a man-made law. So, it's very important if you say, well, I want to eat healthy. So yeah, you want to eat healthy, but you physically can't eat healthy because the source of your food is the same who is trying to deny you your health. You see so that becomes a dilemma. So local self-reliance becomes an important point. So if you can have control of the source of your food, then you can control whether or not you are getting that healthy food, and you can decide on that. But now we're seeing that we don't have to grow the food and harvest the food and expend all that energy to do that. We can now get what we need, which is the sustenance energy of our life. We can do this plasmatically. Well, that really becomes a game changer. So not only do we not have to depend on the transportation system, we don't have to depend on the farmer, and we don't have to depend on the technology. We can do it ourselves. And so this awareness all of a sudden is a shock. And if you are on the welfare system, you are not used to having responsibility. That is the greatest shock of all. Well, you mean I can feed myself? It sounds kind of stupid, but well, it is actually, because this is how we've been conditioned. And so we now have a new condition that's coming in. And the dilemma we all have is, how are we going to relate to this new condition? So it's changing the whole game. And the question, is, why is that change not a welcome change? It should really be a very welcome change, because let's face it, we would all, have dependable sources and expend less energy, in achieving that. And we would indeed have, heaven on earth. And for some reason, that's not a nice picture. So everyone has to ask themselves this question. And you take it one step further and you say, well, the whole attention that we have with respect to our existence is to feed our body, is to nurture our body. But, as a farmer, you care for the animals, and then at the end, you send them to the slaughterhouse. So you really have to be two-faced in that regard, don't you? Or you care about your plants growing, And then you bring the combine along and you just hack and bind and bale all of them together and then store them in the barn so that you can feed them to the cows, which you're going to take to the slaughterhouse anyway. So like, what's the difference? Or you're a soldier and so, you know, you pull the trigger, but you're not alone in this. So there's another soldier who also wants to pull the trigger, and you know, who connects first? And so you as a soldier suddenly become the victim of the soldier activity. And so what you worked so hard to do to impose your rules on someone else, they have outfoxed you and imposed their rule on you. And so you're now forced to discard your own body, which you worked so hard to preserve. And it goes even one step further, which we see with the PTSD, those soldiers who have survived these unbelievable circumstances can't survive their own soul, because their own soul is their own judge. And the judge is looking at the bank account and is saying, I didn't make enough money. And even if I made 10 times as much money, it can't eliminate my memories. And so we have other things that we harvest. So we have alcohol to drink, plants to smoke, or drugs to take. And they all basically are environment and emotion altering so that we can cope. And what are we doing? We're really just treading water, waiting for the end, when we could just discard that body that we worked so hard to preserve. And so really that doesn't make sense either, does it? At what point do you say, okay, you are no longer something that I nurture, you know, I'm going to throw you in the garbage, you know? And we say, you know, when you're talking to a gold digger, you know, she says, well, he's just a soup du jour. And when I flatten his wallet, you know, then I'll look for another. And then that becomes a way of life for some. Well, what's the difference when you discard your lover into the garbage bin? You know, maybe someone else is going to discard you to the garbage bin. Or maybe you go yourself to the garbage bin. And so when we look into space, we find that there's no place to throw stuff away to. When we throw stuff away, where is that place? Is it on the dark side of the moon? Wouldn't that be a hoot when we go to the moon and we find this massive garbage dump on the other side of the moon? Maybe that's why the moon doesn't rotate. I think I
Well,
made my point.
we're going through a process. I know that. Gail, I see your mic is open.
Oh, thank you, Mark. And Alex, I really appreciate your efforts in teaching us. It's amazing. We've come a long way. I have a question, and I don't remember exactly how far back it was, but there was mention that we can harvest the energy of the universe, but not the matter that's created from the universe. And I'm trying to understand if that means plasma, or, you know, are we supposed to harvest just the rays? I wasn't clear on that. Do you
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
okay.
great question. Great question, Gail, and
Thank you.
thank you for contributing. The raise is always what we harvest. So there's always an emission. It becomes a point where we become the co-creator, but that doesn't mean there will be a corresponding absorption, because we cannot force the absorption. We can only look after from our point of view. So our point of view is our MAGRAV condition, whatever that is, and then what we are, from that we can emit. And that emission point is a ray. And the question then, if someone can absorb that ray, it also boils down to the fact, do they want to absorb that ray? So in all cases, regardless whether it's a matter or a small m matter or capital M matter, or what we refer to as matter gen, then it doesn't matter. All of that is plasma. So the word plasma is generic. It means physical matter or plasmatic matter. That is all plasma. But the energy state in the physicality is at least an order of magnitude below, say, a nanostate, and on our way through to the soul state. And so even through the diagram, we say, well, maybe the soul state is 5 orders of magnitude. Well, it's not. It's many, many more orders of magnitude in a higher field strength. So based on the plasma science, even if it was just 1 order of magnitude, that the soul would be the feeder, but the soul feeds all of them, all of the states below, because the higher does not discriminate what it feeds. The soul will emanate or emit a ray, and then the absorption will be done gravitationally by a weaker field. And we didn't say which weak field. So any weak field can absorb that. So this is where the strength of the plasma dome comes in, because if the plasma dome, being of a higher energy state, is true, and it emits peace, which is what we are wishing, then that peace will be given out as a ray to all those who are in a weaker state. The question is, will they absorb that? And so you could say that, will they harvest that? Well, they will harvest that if they want to. But there are those who don't want to. That wanting, if it's from a feedback point, which is the physicality, is at a very, very low energy state. But coming from your soul may not be welcome for whatever reason, because that person is disconnected from their soul. However, their soul will happily absorb that field of peace, because that is the universal law. So that person's soul will have absorbed this energy, but will not necessarily share that energy with the physicality, because the soul of the body has disconnected. So what we're using is the vision enhancement unit to facilitate the connection. And when that connection happens, the physicality has no choice. It has no choice, because it has to respond to the soul of the body. And so if the soul of the body has responded to the soul of the man, which will never lie to the physical body, because the soul of the man, your soul, will never lie to you. Your soul will always nurture you. Your soul will never take you to the slaughterhouse. That's the point. So the only way that you can operate is if you're disconnected. And so the business of the plasma science is in the reconnection. And it's not just necessary for us. That's the point. Because when you are in an interdependent universe, then all we have to do is connect to the nurturing needs of the universe. That's all we have to think about. We don't have to think about anything else. We don't have to think about how expensive is the tractor, or we don't have to think about, is it going to rain today, or is it going to be muddy? Can I harvest this, or it's winter or whatever. We don't have to think about. The universe provides what you need on demand, as much as you need. But there is no universal battery where you can store that energy, because that energy is always in motion. So if you want that energy, then you have to tap in. And to tap in, you have to release from where you are. And so wherever you are, that's where you are. It sounds stupid, but that is where you are, and you are where you are, and I am where I am. And so my point of view is my point of view, and your point of view is your point of view. But the source of that viewpoint comes from the creator. And so the feedback to the creator comes from the soul of the man. And you have one and I have one. And the position that we have is determined by the environment. And whether that environment manifests itself in physicality is determined by the soul of that environment. And so if it happens to be the interaction of the soul of the sun and the soul of the earth, and will that manifest itself into the physical earth? And then will our soul of the man interact with the soul of the earth and physically manifest onto this earth? That's one possibility. But then there's the soul of Mars. And will we want to interact with the soul of Mars? And so we could manifest ourselves physically there, but it is of a different field strength. And so what is the field strength that is giving us the sustenance? It is not the interaction of the field of the soul of the earth, and it is not the interaction of the soul of Mars. It is the interaction with the soul of the creator, because the creator is giving us the universal energy. It is bountiful all over the place, and it is benevolent. It is unconditional. So all we have to do is just reach out and tap into it. And if we could understand that, so that not that we have access to the energy, we always have access to the energy. It's not to discount that energy by disconnecting from it. So we disconnect the energy from the soul of the man, and we enlist the services of the physicality of our environment, which causes us to kill. But now we're at a point that as we become more knowledgeable, we find that, okay, if we elevate our understanding to the point where we don't kill, but you know that the vertical people have methods of defense, and the horizontal people still have, their own methods of defense, and they have demands on their systems. So the rules for us are not just the rules for us, but all of creation. And this, personally, is a huge revelation. And I'm very grateful for that revelation, because what I've known already is that I have a responsibility to the welfare of this planet. But I don't have the capability to do anything about it. But if the range of that capability comes down to the point of making a cup of life, that excuse is now gone everywhere. And through each of us individually, we have now this capability to create the dome of peace. We have to understand what the dome of peace means. And so the dome of peace becomes the manifestation of that which we wish to harvest. And that which we wish to harvest is that which we wish to emit, that energy system that we have to emit, because before we absorb, we have to emit. That's a sequence. And so we really have to be responsible in that regard. So, you know, we all have different skill levels. And however, we are all creatures of the universe. And now we know that we're not alone. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, it's truly a wonderful revelation, because we now all realize that heaven on earth is a realistic possibility. And it's something that we should all strive for, because what exactly is more important than that? How we doing, Gail?
I'm very happy to hear what you're saying. Thanks. Absolutely happy.
We like happy, happy, happy.
If we could all be happy, this whole place would be in heaven.
Would anyone else like to come in? Please feel free.
I like to, oh, go ahead.
Could you come closer? Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can, Selena. Thank you.
Yeah. So I have some crazy thought. It's different kinds of thoughts. I want to tell everybody about that. What about this? If the frequency change suddenly and we beat differently, maybe we'll be satisfied and then hunger will be gone. It could be the possibility.
Again, Selena, if I may.
Yeah.
What I've been trying to do is to make it perfectly clear the difference between the physical and the plasmatic. And so automatically, by definition, as soon as you say frequency, you're talking about the physical reality. So the beat frequency of the heart is not so much from the feedback of the physicality, but from the feedback of the emotional state. So the heart is involved in the emotional transition between the soul and the physicality, you see. So,
yeah.
So the feeding,
yeah.
the feeding comes from the soul level, not from the frequency of the physicality.
It's like a state of mind.
Well,
I mean that. Yeah, the frequency, I mean that the state of mind. So the whole structure is changed the other way.
Yeah, but the state of mind is dependent on the feeding system and the feedback system. There's a relationship. So the feeding system is the magnetical and the feedback is the gravitational. right?
Yeah.
So the state of mind is dependent on what is the primary feeding system. Is the feeding coming from the feedback side, or is the feeding coming from the feeding side? And that's not double talk. It's just we have the feeding system cannot operate without the feedback system. Because let's say, so you're hungry and you come to the restaurant and you say to the waiter, oh, I'm hungry. Okay, well, I will feed you. And the next thing you know, he puts 100 dishes on your table of 100 different types of food. And you say, well, wait a second, I said I was really hungry, but not that hungry. Well, what's the waiter going to say to you? But sir, how big is large? How big is very hungry? Someone who is very hungry, they would maybe normally eat one egg, so being very hungry, they might eat 2 eggs. But someone who eats 4 eggs and they're very hungry, they may eat 8 eggs. So, you better get some feedback here because, well, the guy's very hungry. How many eggs does he want? Well, I don't know, so that's why we assign a number to that. But when we deal with the plasma energy gives you exactly what you need. It doesn't count the individual frequencies, the 1 and the 2 and the 3 and the 4. These are all digital. So we don't operate digitally. We operate analog. In other words, we know when the music's too loud, right? We know when we're bored. We know when we're angry. And we know when we've eaten too much. And then if we've really eaten too much and we become, how shall we say it, greedy, and then we get indigestion, we get an upset stomach, right? Because we've eaten too much. And so, we eat everything that we see, but we don't listen to our body, which says, hey, I'm giving you the feedback, ready to explode. Well, all I have to do is loosen my belt. Well, that is not the only thing that we have to take into account. So this feedback is continually important. And so this is how you know that, if your hand touches the stove and the stove is hot, you remove your hand, right? So, Ed, your video is on. So the stove gives you the feedback via your hand, right? So this is how you know. But, what caused you to put your hand to the stove in the first place? So that was your feeding system. So to determine whether you will continue to leave your hand there, that is your feeding system, but it has to take into account the feedback. So that's just a small example of everything that we're doing constantly. So now when you understand that you have over 70 trillion cells in your body, and each and every one of them is being fed by your soul, and your soul is getting the feedback from each and every one. So you think about it, there's 70 trillion feedings and 70 trillion feedbacks. So now you understand how each cell transacts a communication. So the communication being a feedback plus a feeding. That's 2 communications. So each cell processes 250,000 communications per second. So that's 250,000 times 70 trillion. And you sitting there doing nothing, and you say, well, I don't know how come I'm so tired. Well, because you're constantly processing. And so you need to constantly process. And it's a good thing that you get 80% of the energy from the universe and from the conventional system that we've acclimatized ourselves to, we get 20%. Because if you had to get all your energy from the harvesting, you wouldn't be able to sit here without a feed bag around your mouth. You'd have to, that would have to be a mandatory fashion accessory. So, you need a dress, you need shoes, a hat, and oh, by the way, you need a feed bag as well, because you have to feed yourself constantly. So fortunately, that's not the case. And now we're becoming aware to the other possibilities. So the whole question then becomes is, well, how do we adjust to this? So state of mind, as you said, is a very, very important component. And that state of mind then becomes armed with the knowledge of food security within your hands, within your capability. And so now, what do we give our time and attention to? So we need to work at this. And every week, we keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Why is that? Because we're attracting a certain kind of field strength, and that field strength is edifying. In other words, it's creating, it's growing. Okay, and the feedback that we give to it is suggesting, hey, you're on the right track, keep it coming. So, I personally have noticed more peace and contentment in my life. I have noticed better things physically in my life. I have noticed more, how shall I say it, more beneficial things and less detrimental things happening in my life. And if I can associate those conditions with my state of mind and seeing that I am the creator, so those good conditions I have created, and those bad conditions, well, I have created them as well. So I am responsible. Well, I don't want this responsibility. I don't. You know what I want to do? I want to do absolutely nothing, and lots of it. But that's not the way the universe works. So all I need to do is change the attitude and understand it's better to work with Mother Nature than to fight her. You can harvest way more. Over to you, Selena.
Yeah, I understood that. Thank you. But there is something else. I cook when I cook for my family, like when I cook rich food, like we use lots of spices and rose water, those kinds of good smell stuff, and kara, a lot of scented oil. So when I cook, I can eat. When I cook a lot, then I feel I'm full already. I can eat that much. I try to, but I can. So I saw some diet long time ago. There is the diet, people smell something before eating and they eat less. And same similarity is happen when I cook. So our smell is something doing inside to reduce hunger.
Well,
That is
certainly.
one thing.
Have you ever been in a mall where they are making cookies?
Yeah.
Baking cookies, and they put a big fan behind the stove, making sure that the aroma from the cookies is passing through the building. Right?
Yeah.
The hamburger joint next door to me does the same thing. They make sure they blow the exhaust from the grill out as far as they can. The whole area smells of the local restaurant. Okay, so, you know, it says, oh, you know, I feel like I'd like a hamburger, you know, so, and oh, look at that, there's a hamburger place right there. How convenient. So, you know, that affects the emotion. And so then the emotion affects everything else. Another thing, of course, we all know this basic rule is never go shopping on an empty stomach at the grocery store. And you will find that you will save money.
That's true.
But, you know, you brought up another point, which I would like to proceed on. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Well, so you are a great cook, and now you find out that you don't need to cook. Does that mean you will stop cooking tomorrow? And the answer better be no, because there are consequences. The thing is that there is a adaptation that we have to go through. And so if I may be blunt, so we talked a lot about the waste situation. So, you know, a lot of the problems that we have with our health is, well, in our society, it's eat focused, right? Eat healthy, you will be healthy. But, you know, literally, if you can go to the washroom every day, and especially women, they can't do that every day. And that is a fact. But the fact doesn't come from the fact that they're a woman. It comes from the fact that most of the seniors are over medicated, and it is a fact that most of the medication is enteric, and in that process, it means it bypasses the stomach. And so it doesn't get dissolved until it gets into the upper intestines. But in that process, it causes a stool hardening. And so it is difficult to go to the washroom with a hard stool. And so this causes constipation. And so this is not just something that I made up. There are drugs that promote the softening of the stool to overcome the hardening of the stool of other drugs. And so you now understand why so many seniors especially have difficulties, because they are consuming a cocktail of drugs, some drugs for the system and some drugs to overcome the side effects, and then of course some drugs to facilitate going to the washroom. But the bottom line is, we'll all understand the peace and contentment we have when we can go to the washroom easily. And if you have a dog and you take that dog out for a walk, try and look at the countenance of the dog. And I know that you have to look through all the hair and everything, but can you see the relief on the face of the dog when the dog has an ability to do its business? So it's not pretty to talk about, but, you know, if we can eat, that brings us happiness. But, you know, it's not as happy as it is being able to go to the washroom on a regular basis. And so what we find is that if we are not eating regular, we can't go to the washroom regular. And so we have to regulate the rate of change. So this is what I'm saying. We have become physically dependent on a method of eating and a method of elimination. And so that also has to change. and this is going to take time. And there's no better time to start than now. And I have noticed this myself. So I tried to stop eating, and it caused me a lot of problems. So I changed the way I was eating and understood that the vertical people are protein, the horizontal people are protein, and in the production of protein, we create water. We know that with the cup of life, we create amino acid, we create water. So the breakdown is the one plasma field breaks down into two. And so when we build up the amino acid, 3 amino acids make a chain, 4 amino acids fold over and begin to create a cell. And that folding over is created from an energy system that is feeding to the amino acid, is it not? Because how does the protein know to fold over to become protein? Who is feeding that? And so we're back to that original question that Mark asked, if there is a dead meat, can that meat procreate? And so the answer is yes, it can. And so if it has a magnetical field and a gravitational field, which creates a balance of a maggrav positioning, does it have a soul? And so if we find that each and every cell has a soul, then even the dead meat has the soul. And if that communication of the dead meat stays within the meat, then it is possible to have that grow. But if that meat decides to be decayed, where we're saying the aerobic bacteria, which sustains the meat, suddenly becomes anaerobic. And in that process, it consumes the meat. So that physicality will disappear. And so this is what happens in the decay of the body. The anaerobic bacteria takes over. So the question then becomes is, how can we maintain our physicality, our physical body, when we run into some kind of tragedy? And so that knowledge is now being opened to us that indeed we can. Well, if that is the case, your future as a gourmet cook is going to stop very
It's
soon.
going to be finished pretty soon. Yeah.
You're going to be fired.
It'll look like misbehavior.
Yeah.
Couple people have asked in the chat if anyone knows if we reached the goal or the contribution Mr. Kesh asked for. I didn't hear anything. I thought he said they'd report it by the end of the day, but I didn't hear. My thought is, of course, we did, but maybe someone has different information they can share.
I didn't either.
Of course, Alex, this whole feeding is a process. I know he mentioned the GAN's water to elevate the plants will actually elevate the soul of the man. So I think we'll be eating for a little while longer. And then, of course, maybe with the plants being elevated by taking the GAN's water, they'll be more likely to give off fields to absorb, or stronger fields perhaps that are easy to absorb as we learn these techniques. Remember, he said you could walk through a supermarket today and you could absorb everything you wanted to in that supermarket. It's just our lack of knowledge on how to do that.
Yeah, so Well, what I'm saying is that the transition from 100% feeding in the physicality to 0% feeding in the physicality has to be done gradually.
Right. He said we wouldn't even recognize perhaps a man in the future of what we see now. And this may be over a century or amount of time, but things will
Oh,
definitely
there's
change.
there is no prescribed time.
Correct.
Each of us is, you know, on our own path. It's just that, you know, we are coming through a couple of crossroads here. One is that, you know, in order for us to transcend these various dimensions, we have to be able to transcend from the physicality to the soul level. But, you know, then we have the other question, would we come back? And then if we don't want to come back, would we go somewhere else? And then if we go somewhere else, would we manifest into the physicality there? And so with all these questions, we don't have all the answers in these, you know, basic classes. We're just starting to get some insight into this whole thing to understand not only our capability, but our purpose. And so for me, what I've been doing in my life is if I didn't have the answer, what I wanted to know is what are the options, and then examine these options and reject them. And what was so frustrating is when I came to the end and rejected every single option. So that was no fun. I can tell you that was no fun. So, you know, when the doctor gave me 6 months to live, and he says, well, you know, here are your three options. You know, it's like door number one, you know, your option is operation, and door number two is radiation, and door number three is, well, death. And so, well, thank you for all those options. I'd like to see option 4. Oh, no, there is no option 4. Well, we now have more options. I'll tell you what, that gives me tremendous peace of mind.
It is all about programming your brain. Do you remember a few weeks ago, I was looking for the Mr. Cash madly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to tell right now the story about that. Like a month ago, my daughter was coming from the medical school. She's in another state. So in the nighttime, 8 o'clock almost, she was in the freeway, and then her tire blew up. So she's okay, everything okay, but the car is problem. So she was at that time in the rural area. So there is no motel, no car shop, and that was Sunday, so no fixing. So I was so worried about that. And then her father, when he heard that, and he right away went there. Like it took a few hours to go there. He went there. So after that, they found a motel, and then they stayed there. And then next day they came home. They fixed the car and then came home. So that night, I was trying to sleep. I was trying to sleep, but I didn't half of the night. But in the morning time, little bit sleep. That time I dreamt. I dreamt about. It's like that. I am in the I'm in the place where I know everybody is the like village people, they know each other, like those kinds of place. I live there. And then my cousin lived with me. She is little and she lost. And I know she lost, but if I look for the area, I will find her. But there is a worry about her. She lost. So at the morning when I woke up, and then I think about that dream, and I found the similarity, my daughter's situation and the dream. I know her tire is blow up. She is in the highway, and then I know her father went there and they got the motel and they are okay right now. So she's okay. So that feeling and the dream feeling, my cousin is lost, but I know she is in the area. If I look for her, and I will find her. The similarity. So these kinds of happen all the time. If you are already, I think so everybody got those kinds of dream if you are already, and similar dream is coming that time. So after that, my husband, lot of time he worked in the nighttime, so I stayed home alone. So most of the time I do like I watch TV but without sound, and and I go to sometime YouTube, and sometime in the phone, or read book, or write something I'm doing. And that after doing that, the light is on, I go to bed. Like 1 hour later, after sleeping 1 hour, I woke up, and then I turn off the light, and then again go to bed. There is two things happen. So after that night, the dream night, so I am repeating my thinking. I don't know you are understanding or not. When I first when he go to the work and stayed alone home, so 1 hour I sleep with light on, and then second time when I turn off the light, that time in my brain I see something like a sliding movie or sliding picture is come from the brain, inside of my brain, and it touches my eyelid, inside my eyelid, like each moment like 3 4 sometimes 6 7 together is coming, the sliding picture, and it touch my eyelid and it's vanish. It's like average, like each moment is five picture. So until my sleeping, it's happened like thousand times. Second time when I go to bed, it's happened like 7,000 times. So I think about that. What about, or what is coming from my brain to eyelid? It is my memory. It is my programming. Maybe not for only this life, maybe others' life programming. You know, each sliding there is a memory. So thousand memories touching my lid. So I was so worried about that. What is going on? I want to know that. That's why I was looking for the Mr. Cash. But right now, I think I little bit understood about that. It was my memory, and it is my programming. And I'm seeing the, what is that say? I forgot the word.
Intuition?
No, like which place we are, everybody together this time. There is a movie name that. It's okay. I'll find later.
If I may add, Selena, so
Yeah.
you do understand that the communication method in the physicality is different from the communication method with the soul.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So for you to expect, say, a verbal communication or even a pictorial communication is actually not fair, because in both those cases you're talking about physical state, and you want to converse, you want to have a conversation with a plasmatic state. So the means of communication are different, and also at a different rate. So what you had within your dream was a, shall we say, a translator, which kind of converted the information from the soul state to your physicality, and the feedback from your physicality to your soul state. So in a way that you could interpret what it was. And this is why it becomes so important for you to interpret your own dreams. And I think you did a masterful job here, because without seeing the actual situation, the thing that they were looking for was a solution. So you understand that a solution is not a physical thing. It's a non-tangible, and it's non-visible. It's like an idea. If I give you an idea, you can't put it in a bag and go down the road with it. You carry it in your mind, in your memory, as you say. So, but if I give you an idea and you say, oh, you know what, that gives me an idea. Well, I gave you an idea. No, you gave me another idea. And I said, no, I gave you this idea. So this idea created another idea. And so what you have is a plasmatic manifestation of an idea that creates a second plasmatic manifestation of an idea that merged with your interpretation. You see what I'm trying to say? So there is a connection. And in order for you to determine specifically, to verify and validate what that means, it's impossible. It's like knowledge, so we have so many different people at the seminar, and each one interprets what we say differently, and each one will take this away and do something with it. Some will do nothing with it. Some will dwell on it. Some will have to wait for the soul to work it out and convey that meaning to that individual on the individual's terms of reference. Because when I'm conveying an idea, I'm conveying from my point of reference, my reference field. And your reference field is going to take something else into account. That is why your interpretation of that idea is going to say, I have another idea, because I cannot take into account what you are taking into account. That is why the absorption of that energy is specific to you. I can't dictate that. I can only share that. Then you take it how you want to take it. So this is why the knowledge seekers all take different field strengths, different schemes, sizes of schemes, different flavors of schemes. And so someone can look at it and say, oh, that's bad news. And then someone can say, oh my God, I never even thought of that. Isn't that great? That is welcome news. And so how can that news have two different reactions? It's just like going outside and saying, oh, you know, it's raining today. Oh, what a lousy day. And then the farmer says, oh, it's raining today. Hallelujah. What a great day. And so, well, you know, it's the same day, isn't it? So the interpretation, how you take this emotionally, is individual. And this is what gives us the spice of life. And so is the spice of life also sprinkled with the spice of living and dying and abusing and stealing and deceitfulness? Well, those are part of it, but a very small part of it. As we open up to the rest of the universe and we look at the scale, and then when we say, hey, you know, our little tiny perfect universe is around this little tiny perfect world in this corner, and the rest of the universe is this vast unknown. And I think that's the real excitement. That's the real excitement. And then you say, well, who am I? What am I? You know, where am I? Yeah, well, you know, wherever you are, there you are. And whoever you are, that's you. And so now you understand how you can go from here to there. And even if you don't know that, at least you become aware that you can. And so we have to do whatever we can to teach ourselves again. But conditions have changed. With the arrival of Mitra, this deficiency, if you will, has been supplemented. Now, as we become aware to it, we can see that we have different capabilities. And we have strength in numbers. And that's the beauty. We have strength in numbers, and it's not something that, you know, we wish to overwhelm, because if we have strength in numbers, that means we have field strength. And if the higher strength feeds to the lower strength and elevates the lower strength, if the lower strength energy doesn't want to elevate to the higher strength, that's not our choice. That's their choice. Our choice is to bring peace on earth and create heaven on earth. And we can only do that with the plasma science, because the plasma science obeys the universal laws, not the man-made laws. It doesn't matter which man. The only man-made laws that may work are those laws that obey the universal law. So discard that and follow the moral path, and let that be your guide. Thanks, Selena. Beautiful story.
Yeah, I
Yes.
find the word matrix.
Oh, the matrix.
So the matrix is 3 dimensions. And the matrix doesn't have to be physical. You can have the 3 dimensions in the plasma world too. And I mentioned that today already. So it's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's what we're sharing, isn't it? Magnetic fields. I think Mr. Kesh said that in this knowledge when we share. It's just magnetic fields that we're sharing, gravitational, magnetical. You can't hold it really in your hand. You can't put it in a bag. It's just interaction of fields.
Yes.
I love this picture. You know, this is an amazing picture. And you say, well, where is this picture? I'll tell you what you can say. It's not in Canada.
Does anyone else have something they'd like to bring up or discuss or question Alex about, perhaps? Would anybody like to add to the knowledge today? Okay, well, it is past 11 in Europe and so on. There is one clip I'd like to share at the end from Jefferson, which we've all experienced and with the family and so forth. And then we'll play the final disclaimer and the meeting will come to an end. I was thinking Mr. Kesh may join us today, but he's probably busy still totaling up the donations and the loans, perhaps both.
And so I just want to thank all the audience for allowing me to present today. I'm really hopeful that you've enjoyed this journey. Next week's journey is uncharted as we speak. I'm hopeful to get into an advanced insight series. And at this point in time, I can tell you I have no idea where I'm going. So follow me if you wish. Anyway, thank you all. And I hope you enjoy a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank all the knowledge seekers for being here. And of course, Mr. Kesh is getting ready for something special, I sense. And it's all for us to be enlightened and elevated, and of course, pass that on to the others and share it as we understand it. Okay, I think I'll play this final clip and we'll get a little bit more understanding of why the Kesh Foundation is not on television. And as he said to Jefferson, he said, your family would believe it if it was on television. And I think a lot more people would as well. But we're coming to that point, and we do have the TV and there's a lot of videos being produced. I guess that's going a little bit better now. There's more communication and there was some sticking points there. But I think some of that has gotten worked out, and we'll probably start to see some live streaming shows come one after the other from the different language communities around the planet. And then we'll be able to translate those into our own languages, hopefully. Anyone else with anything else before we go to this final segment here? Okay. I'm going to put this on. And again, this was a question from Jefferson. And I think it relates to all of us, and it gives us a much deeper understanding of the, let me just back this up here. Hopefully we'll start it at the right spot. It'll give us more of an understanding of why and how this knowledge has been systematically blocked. We talk about conspiracies or people planning to do things. Well, there's been a huge plan to keep this knowledge from the people. I think it's gone on for probably 20 years or even longer. I know NASA was aware of Mr. Kesh in the late 80s, and he was blocked there as well. But now it's all starting to open up, and it's all good. And I think we'll start to see if this project that he's been referring to, collecting some donations and what have you, comes to fruition. We'll probably start to see a certain channel open up, and then that will just lead into more and more things, and it will catapult. But everything had to be in place before that is going to happen. And I think we're getting there. And again, hopefully we're not going to have to back away. We're going to go forward with it, but I don't know the timing exactly of the universe, but I'm just here to support is what I can. So thank you all for attending today and sharing knowledge, and hopefully you've absorbed more knowledge to share and serve the others with. And thank you again, Alex, for your consistency and your beautiful teaching.